Civil servants and MPs have the ability to join technical and political, regional, and global networks of organizations that seek to strengthen the bonds of friendship and cooperation between legislative institutions. For the promotion of the legislative digital transformation, these institutions can play an essential role in opening the way to the free flow of expertise and experiences from their peers. There is absolutely no talk of innovation and digital transformation without the collaboration dimension. I'd like to invite to our debate today Mr. Jeffrey Onganga from the Pan-African Parliament, Mr. Justin Wein from the House Democracy Partnership, Mr. Ludovic Delepiné from the EU Parliament and the ICT Governance Hub from the IPU, Mrs. Mariane Barbieri from the OECD, and Mr. Hwang from FiscalNote. Ludovic, I'd like to start with you, our debate today. Ludovic, you are a reference in different organizations for the digital transformation in the legislative, such as the EU Parliament and the ICT Governance Hub from the IPU, as I just mentioned. The cooperation and the collaboration of the legislative community can seriously enhance the digital transformation in the institution they represent. Recently, you made a very insightful presentation for the Logitech series, which I encourage everyone to watch, about the inter-parliamentary cooperation for the legislative digital transformation. At Bússola Tech, we mapped that legislative houses, both national and subnational, have very similar challenges for their digital transformation applied to the legislative process, as we debated in the first panel. I'd like to ask your insights on why civil servants from Parliament are seeking their peers to tackle their challenges, and what are the major areas of cooperation in the realm of digital transformation in the legislative power.
Thank you very much, Luis, and thank you very much for opening this theme, which is, as you mentioned, extremely important for us. And thank you for being the first one to open this panel with all these people coming after. Let me tell you one thing. Since we met and since we had exchanges, we noticed that there is no small parliaments anymore, almost. We have seen innovation raising in many places where they could have been mentioned unexpected. So we can really say that innovation can happen everywhere and digital transformation can happen everywhere in different means, but they happen everywhere. And we have seen during the World e-Parliament conference that took place some days ago that we had wonderful examples from Mongolia, Paraguay, Bhutan, or Ecuador. So there are really places that are realizing wonderful digital transformation. And if we look a little bit more into detail into the World e-Parliament report that has been established over the contribution from 116 parliaments in the world and that have been consolidated by Andy Williamson, we can see that the parliaments had to permanently amend the regulation or governing legislation so that parliaments can function seamlessly, unconfined to a single physical location. So that was really the first point that came out. And during all this period from the COVID situation to the post-COVID situation, this was one of the domains where there was a lot of cooperation in between parliaments. And we also had 6 other domains on which there were a very huge contribution from parliaments to parliaments or topics on which there were exchanges. The second one is to continue and expand the flexible participation from members and the public, particularly in committees. As you know, very often in chambers, you've got the plenary and you've got the committees in which the legislative work is prepared. And inside the plenary, works change quite a lot and with remote participation, while a little bit less in committee. So there's an overall reflection on how to enhance his capacity to work on remote participation in committees. The third domain is to proactively maintain and adapt efficiency gains. There was a lot of gains related to the use of the offices, related of the moves that were made, and these gains needs to be consolidated, and what was gained through these economies needs to be reinvested into advancements. Then the approach toward ICT has changed. Now it's more holistically through an institution-wide digital strategy, mainstream into a wider fabric and culture of Parliament. This is really something that we did not see that much before. IT was considered as being still a kind of standalone technical world. Now this is completely over. There is a huge digital appetite for end users, and now ICT is even more considered as being an holistic approach and not an IT pure approach. And among the three last ones, we had to consider the domain of business continuity. So, of course, reviewing and updating business continuity plans to capture and embed lessons learned from these previous years, the two last years, through enhanced knowledge management practices. We also had to exchange a lot on two different topics. The first one was to exchange on the development of flexible work arrangements for staff and remote participation for members, which had a lot of consequences on ICT infrastructure needed to support them. And the last one, and this is the main point that you highlighted in this introduction, which is to ensure, support, and participate in the inter-parliamentary collaboration to accelerate innovation, save time, save money, and share good practices through a mutual support and an increased mutual support between parliaments. And this is something that we have really seen from the very first weeks of the pandemic situation. We had a very active group with more than 40 parliaments that were exchanging several times daily, and it was a worldwide group. So there was a request to adapt, to change, to exchange, and to share practices so that we could all grow together and benefit from the experiences of the others.
Thank you for your remarks, Ludovic. Mariane, I'd like to move to you. You act in the Open Data and Digital Government Unit in the OECD. I'd like to ask for your insights about the level of digital maturity in the OECD member states, particularly focused on the legislative power.
Okay, before answering your question, let me just contextualize a bit the work of the OECD in the area of digital transformation before getting in details of your question. So the OECD has been working to help governments make a strategic use of digital technologies and data to deliver public value, and our work builds on the council, the recommendation of the council on digital government strategies and on a policy framework based on 6 dimensions that serves as a compass to countries in achieving higher levels of digital government maturity. To assess this level of digital government maturity from the executive side, and I'm going to explain why this in a later moment, we have published the Digital Government Index that aims to measure the digital transformation in governments. The OECD has also the Global Parliamentarian Network that works as a hub, meeting 3 times a year, connecting MPs and official staff around the world to exchange experience and connect with the work and agenda of the Secretariat and the Parliament around the world for projects. All this to say that, and this is my first conclusion that I wanted to share with you, is that a big focus so far has been given to advise and monitor digital transformation at the executive branch when compared to the work that has been done so far at the legislative. For example, in the Director of Public Governance, we work pretty much on demand of countries' needs. And this is actually a good proxy, I would say, on showing that countries have been mostly focused so far on the executive branch. My second consideration, and that this links to the first conclusion, is that the measurement instruments have so far focused much less on digital maturity in the legislative, as refers your question refers, rather than to the executive. And we also have other examples from measurement instruments from other international organizations besides the OECD. So what I will share here about digital maturity in Parliament does not come from a measurement instrument that we have in place, but from some analysis I've been carrying out in the last months, together with the knowledge that we have here in digital transformation. So overall, both in the executive and legislative branches, when considering the OECD group of countries, these countries are well projected in terms of digital transformation. We have, for example, Korea, UK, Denmark, Japan, Canada, just to mention a few. that stand out in their use of digital technologies and data to produce public value. And by produce public value, I mean their capacity to govern and leverage digital technologies to rethink and re-engineer process, simplify procedures, create new channels of communication and engagement with stakeholders, make a strategic use of data to deliver better policies and better services, and also accord a central role to people's needs and convenience in the shaping of process, policies, and services. When we zoom in at the legislative branch, we observe that some non-OECD countries as outliers in digital transformation of parliaments. And here, for example, I'm thinking about in the context of some Latin American countries, such as Argentina, Brazil, and some OECD countries not doing as well as we would expect if we take as a parameter their performance in digital transformation at the executive branch. So, and here I have just a couple of elements that corroborate with these findings. From a total lack of engagement of some of these countries in regional parliamentary hubs, the lack of information available even in the websites or in the websites or information the parliament itself provide about digital transformation in their parliaments, and also the way that they have been responding to the pandemic. Some of them shutting down their parliaments, others trying to reorganize their physical space to accommodate physical meetings in a context of a pandemic, adopting proxy vote without considering digital tools to allow the continuity of the activities in the context of a pandemic. And here, for example, I'm thinking about Korea, Japan, Estonia, Germany, Denmark, Netherlands. In a nutshell, great focus has been given on digital transformation at the executive branch so far. The performance of OECD countries in digital transformation at the executive does not necessarily reflect the same when considering their approaches at the legislative branch, even though in overall terms, OECD countries stand as quite advanced in digital transformation at the legislative when comparing to the global average. So I hope I have answered your question, Luis. Otherwise, I'm happy to clarify.
Thank you, Mariane, for your consideration. Justin, I'd like to move to you. You asked as the Chief of Staff to the Chairman of the House Democracy Partnership, an initiative from the U.S. House of Representatives to support the development of effective, independent, and responsive legislative institutions. One of your areas of cooperation is the digitalization of the legislative institution, focusing on the empowerment of the legislature capacity for the betterment of the lawmaking process. According to your experience, what are the main areas of interest of the partner legislatures in promoting their digital transformation?
Thank you for inviting me, and it's a pleasure to be with you all. It might be helpful to explain a little bit about what HDP does first, and to my fellow panelists' point, Ludovic, point earlier about sort of the connective tissue and shared experiences. That's really what HDP, the House Democracy Partnership, is about. We are a unique institution within the United States Congress. We're the only body in both chambers, the House or Senate, that works directly with members of Parliament and parliamentary staff in a sustained, consistent, and effective manner to not only conduct bilateral relations, but to actually share best practices on good governance and parliamentary institution building. We are written directly into the rules of the House of Representatives, and our members are appointed directly by the Speaker of the House and the Minority Leader. So, because of that, we are able to leverage all of the tools and all of the bodies within the Congress itself to aid our partner countries and share best practices. So we work with approximately 20 countries around the world. Some of them have more mature systems than others, and so our program reflects that. We do everything from conducting oversight of the executive branch to committee procedures to research using our Congressional Research Service sort of as a baseline, to budget analysis and establishing ethics codes and rules and procedures and things like that. So when COVID struck, we moved virtually very quickly, and there was a lot of continued engagement, continued interest from our partner countries, in part, I think, because there were no bilateral conversations really taking place, right? There was no travel from anyone. There was no engagement, everything was happening executive to executive across the globe. And so when we moved virtually, we were sort of astounded at the level of interest that remained from our partner countries to engage through this mechanism. And so, initially our programs really focused on how parliaments should be battling the pandemic directly, what legislatures can do to provide information, awareness to their citizens. And then very quickly from there, we moved on to the digital aspect of this, which is how do parliaments actually function related to COVID in a virtual and digital manner. And so it was really interesting as the conversations evolved. We started to talk more about how to function during the pandemic. Everything from establishing protocols for virtual meetings to virtual voting, virtual committee operations, how members of parliament themselves interacted virtually with their constituents. In the case of Congressman Price, the chairman, we hold a number of virtual town halls with our constituents over the course of the year because we couldn't do in-person meetings anymore. And we helped others do the same, increasing social media presence, things like that, things that members of parliament and parliaments around the world were just forced to adopt and change their manner of interaction. But it also highlighted that there are still some great deficiencies and parliaments historically are behind the times for use of digital and virtual technology and technology at large, right? It's always difficult politically to invest in your own institution when you can be spending that money elsewhere. But it's become clear that parliaments, in fact, need to build up their IT infrastructure if they're going to remain engaged and responsive, no matter the circumstances going on in that country. And so, one of the things that we really worked on and that became clear were just how difficult that was for people in remote areas to have connectivity, even as a member of parliament. Women and older members having difficulty with connectivity. We really need to ensure that all members of parliament have access to the same hardware, the same software, the same training, and that staff are trained on how to assist the parliament and getting online and getting vocal, becoming vocal and continuing that connectivity. We also have to work on things like authentication of members of parliament who are utilizing virtual or proxy voting. One of the things we did here in the House of Representatives was create a system whereby a member had to first submit a letter to the clerk announcing that they were going to be utilizing their proxy vote. And then every vote that they utilized via proxy had to be sent through official channels using the House resources so that it was documented. We could prove that this is how a member wanted to vote. And you had to designate up front, this is the one member allowed to cast my votes in my place. And we still have that system in place today, so long as the pandemic is going on. But it took a long time to figure out how do we invent this system out of nowhere to allow for the safe conduct of business in the House of Representatives, while at the same time acting on critical legislation that the American people needed to recover from the pandemic. We passed multiple COVID-related packages utilizing a combination of in-person and hybrid committee hearings and voting. And so this was all, built from the ground up in a very small, very short period of time, but were critical to the success of the House and to many of our partner countries. And I think as people continue to evaluate what working in a digital age going forward looks like, it's an opportunity to build this permanent resiliency into the everyday work of a parliament to make sure that they're prepared to meet their constituents' needs in the next disaster, whatever that may look like.
Okay, perfect. Jeffrey, you act as the head of communication in the Pan-African Parliament, the legislative body in the African Union, and it reaches 55 countries in Africa. We understand the development of effective transparency policies can be enhanced by the digitalization and integration of digital solutions in the legislative process. In your opinion, what are the main endeavors in the region towards a more digital and transparent legislative power in Africa?
Well, thank you very much, and hi to all the participants. Thank you for having me. I mean, obviously, I think what the COVID-19 situation has done to all of us, I think is to make us aware. It make us more aware of the opportunities that we have out there, and perhaps that we can harness technology to make our processes more transparent and convenient for all the stakeholders involved. I think for the Pan-African Parliament specifically, we welcome this with on different perspectives. When you don't have a choice, obviously it calls for investment in how you are going to conduct your business. We, over the past few months now, what we've done, because our work entails working a lot with the national parliaments around the continent, we've realized that those parliaments have embraced the digital side of things. Even when there are now opportunities for them to meet physically, we realize that this is now becoming a norm in terms of getting access to parliamentary work, getting members of parliament to vote, and just engaging in parliamentary business. And this has been a trend that we've observed over the past few months, especially since the lockdown measures were put in place. Now, the issue, of course, is in Africa, while we have that opportunity, while we have that the fact that we have many young people who are excited about technology, it's different from one country to another. The opportunities are different from one country to another. What has happened is the way you're going to work with the South African Parliament, for instance, the way they are going to display the technology and how they were able to adapt is different from how the Parliament of Gambia, for instance, is able to adapt to the situation. Because in some countries, data is still an issue. There are still barriers to internet access. You also still have to contend with executive powers that put a lot of restrictions to how internet is consumed, the kind of content that is put out there, and then obviously how much information you can give to the general public. And that is the idea of parliamentary work, is to ensure that the public has access to what you do. And I think what we found ourselves in is we are faced with challenges in terms of the gap between the necessity to really embrace digitalization and the lack of resources that some countries are facing, resources in terms of skills, resources in terms of material, and I think this is exactly where our cooperation comes into play, because the way certain countries have been able to evolve during this time is by engaging with other parliaments, by sharing technology with other parliaments around the continent, which is something that we've encouraged, because even from our side, what has happened is we've stopped traveling. We've stopped moving around, which was the main aspect of the work. Is if you want to engage with the Parliament of Sierra Leone, the Parliament of Sierra Leone will have to come to South Africa, or we'll have to go there. We realized that we couldn't do that anymore. So then what we needed to do now is to try and assess what kind of technology we can use to engage with the Parliament of Sierra Leone, for instance, to ensure that the members of Parliament from that country are able to participate in the work of the Pan-African Parliament. So we realized by doing that you get wins in certain areas, but again, challenges remain, and this is why I think it's important for me now to have discussed what the African Union as a whole came up with what they call the digital transformation for Africa. digital transformation for Africa was a key component of Agenda 2063, that they realized that you can't actually move forward and develop the continent without a digital transformation. So that was actually sped up in 2020 to make sure that we harmonize and coordinate efforts to give every country on the continent a level field, so that we are able to engage in this new era with with the same resources and the same perhaps a drive. Obviously, what has happened is that we are now clear about that the fact that digital transformation is the way. What we are not clear about, of course, is how we can get every country, at least the majority of those countries, to come to the table and to really participate and harness the power and the potential of digital transformation. So I think all in all, we've realized that countries have taken a lot of initiatives, and many of them have taken initiatives to come and really give digital a chance. But other countries, despite the willingness to do so, are still lagging behind because of the resources and really the legacy that they have to be faced with. And this is again where a collaboration has had to play a key role in perhaps helping all of us moving forward.
Thank you, Jeffrey. Thank you for your initial thoughts. Hello, Tim. I'd like to move with you to our first round. Tim, you act as the CEO of FiscalNote, a private company that uses artificial intelligence and big data to deliver predictive analytics on government information to determine its impact. We understand open data and then data standardization applied to the legislative process is of the utmost importance for you to provide quality insights about the lawmaking process in different countries. My question to you is, what are the key variables that a parliament should consider when deciding to digitalize their legislative process to make its data publicly available for experts in the private sector, such as FiscalNote?
Yeah, no, so it's a great question. And I guess the thing that I would start off with is that we work with parliaments around the world in terms of trying to identify what I call the sort of private sector mandate when it comes to transparency and government information. And so today, just as a little bit of background, over 5,000 government agencies and corporations effectively use FiscalNote's platforms to monitor policy or legislative or regulatory updates from different governments around the world. And so, in many cases, either myself or somebody on my staff will go and we'll meet with, the Minister of Justice or the Chief Administrative Officer at a legislative body. And we'll have a conversation, very direct conversation about, what needs to be transparent, what needs to be online. And I think that, in general, what I would say is that every parliament and every government agency has a very strong interest in digitizing and digitalizing their legislative information. It's actually not for the reason why you think it is, right? So a lot of folks think it's because of philosophical or moral reasons or whatnot. But ultimately, the private sector mandate requires that there be transparency in our legislative and regulatory processes. So as an example, if you, as a head of state or a economic minister, are trying to foster foreign direct investment or cross-border investment, or a company opening up a new factory in your particular country, I can guarantee you that at the top of the list of what corporate executives are thinking about is policy transparency. To what extent are they subjugated to specific regulations, labor regulations, tax regulations, economic development regulations, incentives, and the like. And the reality is that, in many countries, that information does not exist. Doesn't exist in any formal fashion. And so how do you expect a multinational corporation to come into a developing market with zero understanding of the regulatory framework. So in many cases, what we do is we say, okay, if you are a developing country, your primary objective here should be to create as much clarity around the regulatory framework as possible. And the reality is, like, you know, these companies don't really care, you know, if this particular political party is in power, or, you know, the political system requires a direct democracy or is a monarchy. All they really care about is as much clarity as possible. And so I think that when governments are trying to figure out basically what they're trying to prioritize in terms of digitizing specific information, ultimately you need to understand, you know, who the audience is for the particular data. And so, you know, it's one thing to basically take every piece of information and stick it online, which I think is great, you know, for companies like us. But ultimately, the question is, you know, who is the recipient of this information, and to what sort of policy change or objective are you trying to create, right? So a good example of this, for instance, is zoning regulations and, you know, real estate pricing information in the American market. You know, the proliferation of zoning regulations, for instance, across the United States, you know, has resulted in a specific policy outcome, which is basically helping organizations to lower the red tape associated with real estate development, right? So to the extent that organizations or governments effectively want to foster specific economic policies or specific policy outcomes, you know, in addition to the actual policies themselves, the communication of that policy, the implementation of that policy, the data and the content associated with that policy, particularly as it lands in the ears of private sector recipients, is very, very important, because the reality is that, you know, government can bang the table all they want. You know, they can pass a piece of legislation, they can, you know, put resources against a regulatory body, but ultimately the people that are complying with regulations are in the private sector. They're the ones sitting, you know, at their desks in their companies, trying to make sense of, you know, a new healthcare law or a new real estate development law or a new tax law that they're trying to implement. And so the prioritization of that information ultimately needs to be thought about. And so, you know, the reality is that, you know, many governments are, of course, very strapped for resources, right? You know, they can't publish everything all the time. And so building a strong network of stakeholders that can help to prioritize what information should be publicized and to what policy objective they're trying to accomplish, obviously, is a very key component of I think, policy making in general. And certainly, you know, private sector partners like ourselves, you know, our job effectively is to make sure that that information is landing in the ears of the proper folks in the private sector to comply or to understand how those regulations are being promulgated.
Mariane, I'd like to go back with you following up on your first answer. When we mapped the implementation of digital strategies in public sector, the first conclusion we arrived is the lack of correlation between the digital maturity for the executive branch in its implementation of public policies and in the legislative branch and the lawmaking and oversight of public policy implementation. We know many of the member states in the OECD are world-class references in the executive branch digital transformation. In your opinion, how do you understand these differences and how parliaments can shorten the distance between them and the executive branch?
So I'll try to answer your question with a couple of steps, Luis. So first of all, as recalling what I said in the first part of our discussion, there has been a great focus on channel digital transformation at the executive, and for example, here I'm thinking about that the amount of countries with digital government strategy versus digital strategy for parliament. Same thing for monitoring mechanisms in digital transformation in parliaments. The second aspect that I wanted to mention is that we see a lack of articulation across the executive, legislative, and judiciary. and their strategies in the absence of groups where they can, where different branches can learn from each other's experience. And here my third point is that, well, a key driver, usually a key driver that leads countries to invest in digital transformation, talking here about the executive level, and then here also recalling some of the conversations that we have with countries, is the idea of potential gains in terms of efficiency in processes, increase in productivity and cuts in expenses, for example. In the setting of the legislative, this is actually quite the opposite, in the sense that the legislative is full of its own traditions and internal culture that makes parliaments what they are. And in this context, we also have diversity, accessibility when engaging with stakeholders, transparency in the legislative process as key to a functioning democracy and a functioning parliament. So what I mean with this is that digital transformation in parliaments, it may not lead to the idea of efficiency and may even sometimes slow down the legislative process. So meaning that the narrative to digital transformation in the legislative is quite different from what we have, for example, with the executive. Yet adopting digital technologies and data in parliament can lead to intangible gains. So, for example, allowing people from remote areas to attend virtual public hearings, gather a diverse range of opinions from different groups and specialists, allow civil society to contribute to the legislative work with proposals, closely monitoring the agenda of MEPs and voting sessions, etc., giving back the legitimacy to parliament and help public institutions to regain trust from citizens. On your second question, specifically on how parliaments can shorten this gap vis-a-vis the executive, law has been done already, to be honest, and here also we hear from the intervention of our colleagues, but also thanks to the great leadership that we have in some parliaments, and here thinking of public servants that have been doing a great job and leading the work of digital transformation inside parliaments. So if there is something, and also if there is something good from the current context of the pandemic, is that the pandemic has been a great push for innovation in parliament. And so I would say that on top of investing in underlying infrastructure, IC infrastructure, open data, etc., that has been already covered in the previous discussions here in this panel, I would say that other aspects are important, such as political will, coupled with good mechanisms of governance, including internal leadership and a strategic vision that makes digital transformation sustainable in the long run. Capacity building here, encouraging not only the use of digital tools, but also a new digital innovation mindset, and also ensuring full autonomy both to MPs and official staff to use tools and be open to innovative tools brought by digital transformation. Last point I would say is that openness is important as well in the process of decreasing this gap between executive and legislative digital transformation, in the sense that engage in collaborative networks, also exchanging with other branches to hear the experience and learn from their experience. And here worth mentioning the important role that hubs have played in the sense of gathering information, connecting parliaments around the world, and also helping to produce knowledge on digital transformation for parliaments. Last point that I wanted to mention on this is the importance of engaging stakeholders in the process of digital transformation. Do not lose sight of what digital transformation looks like for the legislative, and also what digital transformation we want to legislative while preserving its traditions and its own culture.
We have seen during the pandemic of COVID-19 unprecedented levels of collaboration between civil servants from different legislatures. There were so many cases that one failure was not repeated because of direct sharing of expertise. My question to you was, how can our usual suspects for the digital transformation of the legislative provide guidance on their technical and cultural expertise to other legislatures, yet reaching the digital maturity?
I would say that now everybody is aware that there will be no way back. The good old-fashioned way to work is definitively over. Those who think that everybody will come to working premises will reach a kind of utopia that will never be again. And there will be a new normal, but there will be no back to the old normal. And we had to address really several domains all together, and some for which we tried to provide guidance based on the experience we had, sometimes from usual suspects, sometimes also very interestingly from unusual suspects who's just raised, and we are searching for additional information or just to share the experience. We had very good relations with chambers from Fiji Islands, for instance, or from other places in the world, by which people were just saying, well, we were quite isolated, and then we decided to have an exchange with you because of this occasion, this place, this meeting, and there we worked a lot, on all continents, and that was really your point. So I agree with what was mentioned by the colleague from the Pan-African Parliament, which is a case I know quite well for having made a peer-to-peer support there some years ago. This is true that some challenges that were pre-existing to the COVID situation are still existing. This is true. If you had issues with an infrastructure access to information or data, if it was pre-existing before the pandemic situation, it will remain after the pandemic situation. So there are still some constraints that exist, and I can only agree with that. But on other domains, there was quite some expectations and some experiments that were made into mainly 4 domains and that we exchange regularly. The first one is how to work hybrid. There will not be a way back to the office as it was made before. There will not be a way back to plenary sittings or committee meetings as it was before. No, this has changed. We need to work in a hybrid place. We need to make it more sustainable in terms of approach, and to see how we can benefit from the lessons learned and try to evolve the working methods and the tools and equipments which are attached to these new hybrid connections. We have in this domain opportunities that we never had before. Making people having intervention from the other side of the world previously was were mainly managed through missions. So you have to define a budget and to find an hotel for the person and to find an airplane and so on. Right now, you just define a Zoom ID and you transfer the Zoom ID, or sometimes you have to change your equipment, but more or less it works. So it has raised a lot of opportunities that were not pre-existing before. So we discuss a lot about etiquettes, about how to behave, what are the rules that have to be implemented, but really the first domain we cooperate all together and we exchange information, documents, data are related on the new hybrid modes for the working methods. The second is about, we could call that intelligence. Intelligence is how the organization is coping with a new digital appetite from the business side. Many people had to find solutions, and sometimes they found it themselves. They just reused things that were used on their own life. They were exchanging with friends with a specific communication tool, and they decided to use it. So I will not give names there. I will not recommend some of them. But people decided that, well, if it works on private life and I'm secured enough by my law, then maybe I can use it also on my professional activities, and then I will use this one. This will ease my life because I know these tools and we will use them. So there was a lot of solutions that came from the business side, and now the IT literacy has grown, their interest has grown, and they want to have solutions that they know that will provide facilities for them. And they also had opportunities to exchange in between parliaments, not only at the IT level, but also as a business level. You've got hubs which are related to transparency. You have hubs which are related to open data. And all these parliaments have exchanged together also, not only from the IT side, but also from the business side. So intelligence is also a domain by which we try to
see how to grow, not only in terms of solution, but in terms of approach. The third one is about agility. People are not willing to wait for years that a nice IT planning is performed, that you have ideas which will be transformed into projects, that budget will be allocated, or resources will be allocated to your project, and then you will have a nice, wonderful waterfall cycle, at the best one if you may have, and that you will have your results 2 years after because you need to go through all this process. It will not work that way anymore. Agility really becomes one of the key points so that we can deliver solutions, even if not covering all the scope, but really fast to make people use them. And the last one is something also I mentioned on the first question, but the last one where we exchange on the digital maturity side is about security and cyber security. The new working conditions have created new threats, have exposed information system, data, and infrastructure in a way which is unprecedented. And it was mentioned also in a previous intervention that sometimes people do not have the appropriate training or expertise in these domains to protect the organization against cyber threats. And in this context, we also have a lot of exchanges by which we try to explain how to secure infrastructure, how to choose solutions in domains by which you could be protected by laws in terms of data, for instance. So the work has changed. It is more exposed to cloud-based solution. This is part also of the new threats which has to be managed. Not being against, absolutely not, but just considering the risks of exposure from this solution and to put first for the solution delivery the conditions related to cybersecurity.
Thank you, Ludovic, for your insightful response. I'd like to move now to my question to Justin. Justin, legislatures across the globe use technological means, as Ludovic just shared with us, mainly video conference tools and other specialized tools for the legislative process to maintain their activities and flatten the authoritarian curve due to the possible hypertrophy of the executive branch. In an ever-evolving reality of intensive usage of technology in the executive power, it is of the utmost importance for the legislative power to modernize and keep the balance of power. How democracy partnership have close relations with parliament in countries with different levels of democratic maturity? In your view, how does a digital transformation strategy relate to the continuity of the democratic system, and how civil servants and MPs can reach out for assistance from other parliaments from their first digital steps towards the maintenance of democracy?
Well, I think it's essential, and we here in the U.S. know firsthand the effectiveness of the executive branch using technology to foment discord, lead an insurrection on January 6th. So we know full well as a separate branch of government in the legislature and in the Congress that we have to evolve technologically as well. It's essential to the democratic system that we continue to evolve in how the Congress engages with the American people and how members of parliament directly engage with the American people. And so, and that's true in all times, right? Whether that's culturally or socially or technologically, we have to constantly evolve, right? New generations are using new technologies. When I started working here in Congress, Twitter, Facebook, social media at large didn't exist, and now it is a primary tool for members of parliament, for staffers, for the leadership to be able to stay in touch with their constituents, as well as let them know what they're doing to advocate for them in their communities. Email, sort of a similar vein. When not that long ago, 5-10 years ago, almost every interaction between a member of Congress and their constituent was through the mail. And you'd send a hard copy type mailer to someone. They would write you a note with the problem what they're having with the federal government, and they'd get a typed letter back. Now everything's done over email. The vast majority of the interactions we have with the congressman's constituents in North Carolina are done over email. Some of them are done over social media. People will post on his Facebook page or send us a DM on Twitter. Well, almost nothing is done through the actual mail anymore. So that we're constantly trying to evolve with our constituencies. But right now, I think it's even more important because the democratic governance sort of supply chain is tilting more towards the suppliers, meaning that it's up to parliaments themselves to actually provide the governance and to engage the populace, as opposed to waiting for people to seek us out. I think that's especially true in the United States right now. It's incumbent on members to reach out proactively to the American people and to their constituents and let them know that they are working to benefit them. And if you're not willing to adapt and to evolve, you're likely going to find yourself facing an opponent who has done those things, and soon you'll be out of office. So it's critically important for the mechanisms themselves to continue to evolve. That being said, as I set up, in the first question, it's always a challenge to invest in your own parliamentary infrastructure. You're taking money that people will claim you can spend elsewhere. And so it's always a challenge to move towards e-governance. It's difficult in terms of standards, it's difficult in terms of technology, but the cost factor that goes along with that as well. So it really requires sustained leadership. Everyone has to buy into this and be committed to it, because you're not going to transform systems in 1 year. You need to continually be investing in them to build the interoperability, the legal framework, and to continue to use the most up-to-date technology. We have been partnered through the House Democracy Partnership with the Estonian Governance Academy, the EGA, for a number of years now. They are arguably one of the finest examples of in the world of sort of e-governance and government security as well. And they actually have an academy in which they train staff and members of parliament on how to do this type of engagement through the digital world. And so we've been working with them for a number of years through both the National Democratic Institute and the International Republican Institute to continue to bring our partner parliaments together and learn from what's going on in Estonia, which is a model of success. When we actually created a report recently through the COVID era with partnering with the Swiss Agency for Development to build a comprehensive strategy document that can help parliaments reflect on their digital agility, their digital transformation during COVID, how they can adapt to be more resilient, to engage their constituencies going forward, and sort of provide practical examples and tools, as well as pose a number of questions to the parliaments themselves about what they need to be internally asking themselves as they look to a digital transformation that continues to engage a democratic society and continues to have the opportunity for independent legislatures to hold the executive to account and not let them continue to control the narrative in all instances.
Thank you, Justin, for your consideration. Jeffrey, I'd like to go back with you. We understand the Pan-African Parliament is a legislative body, and it has its own legislative activities focused on the region. It also serves the role of a centralized hub to exchange experiences from different national parliaments, as you mentioned in your first answer, in the African Union countries. The Pan-African Parliament is a leading institution in its digital transformation, bringing more effectiveness and the ability for members to participate in meetings, either in person or remotely. My question to you is how the Pan-African Parliament as a regional hub can provide guidance to national parliaments, either by facilitating the channels between national parliaments, yet also sharing your own experience applied to the legislative process.
Well, thank you. I think, it's been said already before, proper strategy, funding, and cooperation are really critical in bridging the gap and making sure that we harness digitalization. So the Pan-African Parliament itself, as a continental parliament, still also navigating through some of these issues, and I think it's been a learning curve, as obviously we try and make sure that we get the right formula in how we are going to move forward. Just one example, for instance, we spent the year 2020 having difficulties getting members of parliament to sit in statutory meetings. While they met online, they met through Zoom, through webinars to engage on issues, especially on COVID issues. But some of the voting couldn't take place because our rules of procedure did not provide for that specific aspect. So no one actually planned for a situation where members of parliament will have to vote online. Now we found ourselves in a situation where they needed to meet to amend the rules so that they can actually vote online, which became a bit of a difficult situation to manage. Now we realize that this is also something that many parliaments around the continent were faced with, as we were trying to see, okay, this was not planned for, and now we have to do things online. How do we actually make sure that if there's a resolution that's voted by a committee of the Pan-African Parliament that is actually and sent to the African Union Assembly, that's legally binding because it was done online without it having a provision for it to be done online. So we've had to wrestle with a lot of these challenges. Thanks God, we are moving. We are moving slowly but surely. We are moving with the help of a lot of partners, including the European Parliament, for instance. We work a lot in trying to learn from what they are doing or what they've done. And so in terms of the strategy, it's the simplest things, such as now we putting together an open data portal, for instance, where now we understand that especially during this period, the questions were always from our members, from the public, is about how can we access information from Pan-African Parliament? How can we access resolutions from the Pan-African Parliament? How can we access recommendations easily? It meant that our IT colleagues now have to put together and really implement the open data portal that won't just have information about what the Pan-African Parliament has done, but also will incorporate information from other parliaments, other member parliaments around the continent. We are now having to relaunch a brand new website, a brand new multilingual website, to ensure that this one, you can actually access other parliaments through the Pan-African Parliament website. So small things like that, and you'll be surprised of the kind of assistance that some member parliaments will require from you. It's usually not even the biggest issue. Sometimes it's just, okay, we need to live stream an event. We've never done it because of the situation. How can we get help by live streaming this? Facebook Live is fine. How can we live stream on YouTube? So those are the conversations that are taking place, of course, between the Pan-African Parliament and member parliaments. Because one thing we have to do, obviously, is that because we have members we have 5 members of parliament per country. So when they participate in events, it is now up to us to provide the logistical facilities for them to take part in meetings. It's up to us to ensure that they are able to connect. So like I said earlier, you will realize it's different from one parliament to another. Some parliaments are ready, others just require more assistance. So we are still on one hand, as a Pan-African Parliament, still looking to ensure that we have the best tools to really deal with the digitalization of procedures And at the same time, whatever we get, we are sharing that knowledge and those resources with member parliaments. And like Ludovic said, we obviously now, unfortunately, at some point, we had to, COVID came, but then there were some challenges that were already there, that I think that were made worse by the COVID situation. So I think, you know, some of these problems were now came even more to the light, and we realized that I think some things needed to have been addressed before we even, you know, we didn't know COVID was coming. So I think you have a lot of dynamics that you play with when it comes to Africa as a whole. But I think I'm encouraged. I'm encouraged by the level of commitment that we are now getting from leaders, from the executives. We know that we won't do this without political will. We won't do this without funding. We won't do this without cooperation. So we need all the stakeholders to come together. So what is usually difficult is to convince politicians of the need, like Justin said, of the need to invest in something like that, especially when you're not convincing them to invest in a political campaign. You know, usually when you're not talking to them about the next election, but rather telling them to invest in in IT, in equipment that will actually reap benefits in 1 or 2 months or a year from now, it's difficult to get them to really come to the table. But I think it is clear now, because of the lack of activities that we were faced with in the first months of the COVID-19 situation, our leaders now have understood that we can't do without that. So now we have to put every resources that we have to try and make sure that we are ready to provide for parliamentarians and give them an environment where they can work. So yes, we are obviously an institution that is supposed, our role is supposed to guide other member parliaments. But you will also be surprised that as some of the parliaments in Africa are really advanced also. They, you know, even the Pan-African Parliament will seek sometimes to learn from those parliaments. So we provide the guidance while we are trying to make sure that we are on par and that we are moving with the required technology. So you know, that's in a nutshell how we are trying to balance those two duties that we have as a continental parliament.
Thank you, Jeffrey, for your consideration. Tim, I'd like to go back with you. You mentioned in a recent debate at Bússola Tech with Senator Anastasia and Representative McGovern that FiscalNote uses a lot of advanced technologies to better understand the legislative information, but it still needs to rely on a number of low technology methods to get additional information about the legislative process. FiscalNote, as you mentioned, is present in dozens of countries across the globe with different levels of digital maturity. My question to you is, what are the challenges being responsible for the implementation of low-tech methods, and how IT teams in Parliament can solve them? Also, can you see a correlation between the regions of the globe and the most common challenges, or yet a correlation between the digital maturity level of the legislature and these challenges?
Ironically, the governments that are the most stable and the most mature have the worst technology standards. And I think a lot of that just comes down to the fact that there's a lot of history and tradition and ways in which, you know, kind of organizations kind of have run themselves, right? So I'll give you a good example. So I'm an American, you know, I'm a US citizen. I think that there are, you know, certain state legislative bodies in the United States that have horrific digital standards. They are publishing, they're not even publishing information, and if they are, they're scanning handwritten amendments of legislation, you know, onto websites on PDF formats. You know, they're basically posting images of actual legislative text with, you know, appropriations scribbled into the margins and things like that. And that's just, that's how they've been doing it forever, right? So you might be looking at a particular committee vote, and you know, you'll see a physical piece of paper with check marks essentially in boxes that they essentially stick online and say that's the government's version of being transparent. And so I think that's contrast that with governments obviously have been recently established, say in the last 3 or 4 decades, where there isn't a lot of tradition and history, and people just sort of gravitate towards the latest and greatest technology. And so I wouldn't necessarily say that there's any level of correlation between government maturity and digital maturity per se, or even economic development, and legislative transparency. It's more just a function of what they've been doing in the past, and they've been doing something for hundreds of years. It's very it's unlikely that they'll be changing in a certain direction. So then, as a company whose entire mission is to collect policy-related information and deliver it to private sector customers, so how do we get around that, right? So we have to rely on a series of very advanced and unadvanced technologies. Advanced technologies such as artificial intelligence, natural language processing, speech recognition. So I'll give you another example, transcripts, right? So, we provide effectively real-time transcripts of legislative, kind of debates, floor speeches, committee markups, hearings, so on and so forth. In many countries, they'll provide closed captioning, or they'll provide information about who's speaking at a given time. In our case, in many countries, including in the United States, we have to use very, very advanced natural language processing technologies to be able to use speech-to-text transcription, effectively you can think of it as an Alexa or a Siri, to effectively try and transcribe, millions and millions and millions of pages of transcribed documents. And so, you talked, for instance, about, trying to create an archive of what policymakers, elected officials have said, what they promised to do, what their opinions are. And so, the question of holding politicians accountable to specific statements that they've made, and particularly in a public setting, in a legislative body, is actually incredibly difficult, because you can't actually search what people have said, right? So how do you hold accountable, your particular MP or your particular member of Congress or whatnot, if you can't actually look in a historical record of what they've said? And so, a lot of times we'll have to transcribe everything in an automated fashion. And if we can't do it in an automated fashion, then it requires, to your point, low-tech mechanisms, right? So, sometimes you'll require people to be, in a legislative body on the floor, watching a particular vote happen, watching a particular debate happen, watching a particular markup happen. And that's just, that's just a challenge, I think, of working through these kind of existing systems.
Thank you, Tim, for your consideration. The final question of our debate is for all of you. It's one unified question. And it has an inspirational perspective to guide colleagues from Parliament in their first digital steps. It's a well-known fact that the pandemic of COVID-19 accelerated the digital transformation prioritization in different legislatures. Differently from the early stages of the remote deliberations, most parliaments evolved from the debate focused on the video conference platform to endeavors seeking to digitalize the legislative process. Before drafting a digital transformation strategy, it's important to understand how other legislatures mapped their challenges and invested in technological tools to address them. A very interesting case is from the Oireachtas in Ireland that promoted an extensive research with other parliaments to enable a more effective digital transformation strategy. I'd like to ask you to please share your views and opinions about the very first steps a legislature can take and where they can find support, either in public or private sector, to advance towards a digital-ready legislative. Ludovic, would you like to be the first one to answer this final question?
I will be very short to not lose time. But at the level of the Center for Innovation in Parliaments, as you mentioned before, I'm chairing the IT Governance Hub. And within this context, we will provide support for the national parliaments in order to develop digital strategies for the next 2 years to come. But the way we will do it is not to organize events related to IT governance, or not organize for our own hubs. What we will do is that we will work with regional hubs. So the Center for Innovation in Parliament is organized in 2 different levels. The first one are thematic hubs, for instance, IT governance or open data or transparency, but we also have regional hubs. And what we decided in agreement with the colleagues from the Center for Innovation in Parliament is to work in close cooperation with regional hubs. So IT governance does not, or digital transformation, let's say, which is one of our dimensions, does not become a topic as such. This is something that we will discuss regionally, because we estimate that there's a kind of harmonized digital maturity in geographical areas, and that parliaments who are grouped together into a region have very often the same issues. And this is exactly what was mentioned by Jeffrey just before. So we know that there's a kind of harmonization with Hispanophone hubs, or Southern Africa or East Africa hubs, or Pacific hub. So what we will do is that, and we will get closer to the regional hubs and work with them on topics which are the current topics that they want to address in the region, into models where we can describe an approach through digital workplace, digital solutions, items related to governance, innovation, and resources, but also how to develop agile and sustainable solutions. So in close cooperation with them, we will work on the deployment of IT governance and the establishment of digital strategies. We already have an agreement with the Southern Africa regional hub, for instance, which is led by Zambia currently. We are currently seeking with agreements with the other regional hubs. So this will be mainly the plan for the 2 next years, supporting the development of parliaments based on the requests from regional areas and thematics which are specific for these specific areas. As mentioned, not all parliaments do have the same needs, and they do not have the same history, they do not have the same capacity. And we think that by getting closer to a regional approach, we will be more efficient, and we will tackle issues which are really the one which are requested.
Thank you, Ludovic, for your consideration. Mariane, would you like to answer this question as well?
Yes, and I'll try to be brief on my answer. So as we start moving towards my focus here, I want to give to this conclusion, let's say, is that as we start moving towards the deconfinement, hopefully we'll start moving towards deconfinement very soon. We should use this as a momentum to not abandon initiatives that have been carrying out over the last year, and digital. This includes digital transformation fostered by COVID-19. So in this new context, I think that it would be also a good opportunity to secure resilience for other future, let's say, extreme contexts, such as of a new wave or a new pandemic or a new event that require reconfinement. But not only that, also use this opportunity of deconfinement to keep improving the tools that have been developed so far. Think the parliament also that we want for a future, and here I'm referring to hybrid systems, as already covered a little bit by Ludovic. And on this specifically, I wanted to say that as parliaments or parliament's modernization efforts are essential for a more effective institution that delivers better laws, a space where debate of public policy occurs, where we have the oversight of the executive branch activities, and also a better representation. But in the context of digital transformation, these, like the institutional tradition and the values that parliaments have should also be preserved. And in this sense, some elements that I think that could help advance towards a digital ready legislative, let's say, are just recalling some of the aspects that were covered here today: the political will coupled with good mechanisms of of governance for a sustainable digital transformation in parliaments over time. Capacity building, openness also will be very key, I would say, in the next steps of digital transformation in parliaments in two senses. From in one aspect, the back office perspective, in the sense of how to be innovative while respectful with the legislative tradition and keep society informed and engaged throughout the legislative process. And this will require good mechanisms to ensure the engagement of public servants and other users of these tools. And here I'm referring, for example, including this group, citizens and civil society organizations, business. From an external perspective, also openness in the sense of how to make a strategic use, thinking how to make the strategic use of digital technologies to leverage and accommodate new forms of citizen participation. And this requires reforms that go beyond digital transformation agenda in the legislative itself, but yet digital transformation can be a great asset to foster new forms of citizen participation and public engagement and help governments regain that trust from citizens.
Sure. I'll be much briefer than 3 minutes. I don't have much more to add, but to what my colleagues have said. Other than, as I mentioned up front, this very question is something that we in the House Democracy Partnership partnered with the Swiss government to look at and to build out a mechanism where others have the ability to see what has been done around the globe to confront these challenges. So, I mean, we looked at everything from the legal framework of moving to remote engagement and procedures, to how a plenary session works in this regard, to how committees work, and to functionality, and to transparency and gender impact. And so, we were proactively trying to build out a document like this so that there was a resource people could look to. Here in the House of Representatives, we have what's called the House Administration Committee, and they are responsible for setting the terms and the rules of all the technology that can be used and how members can use their resources. To their credit, very early on, they changed a number of rules, related to how previous expenses could be spent so that we could buy laptops and things like that. What information platforms we could or couldn't use, such as Zoom. That they really were working night and day to create a system where 435 members, as well as all of our committees, could continue to engage. And so we include our own experience in the U.S. House of Representatives as part of this paper, because we recognize not everyone operates in the same structure and system that we have, where the House Administration Committee can set the terms and then proactively encourage people to do things. But I'm happy to through HDP share this document if folks are interested in it. But I do think it's incredibly important that everyone shares their experiences, and from that, hopefully, we can build some type of baseline best practices. Because while this is a unique circumstance we find ourselves in a once-in-a-century pandemic, it's certainly not the only emergency to have ever confronted countries around the world, nor will it be the last.
Jeffrey, would like to share your thoughts on this final question?
Really not much to say on that. I think it for me is there's clearly now international recognition that we need to strengthen our lawmaking bodies. We need to strengthen parliaments and give parliaments a tool to really deliver for the people, for the citizens. And when you look at initiatives such as in the Center for Innovation in Parliament that Ludovic just said, which I've had the opportunity to interact with, these are really good initiatives that shows you that help is on the way. So I think it means that from the Parliament side, like I said earlier, we need not to have a clear strategy. We need to define our objective. We need to be able to have an audit of what we need, what we require to move. And I think parliaments need to get the act together, because I think there are many resources now out there. There are many entities willing to really provide the help, so that we have this principle of open parliament really materialize through digitalization. So I think we are in for a treat, and again, cooperation for me is the way. Thank you.
Thank you, Jeffrey, for your consideration. Tim, would you like to share your thoughts on my final question?
I think it goes back to the first answer that I gave, which is fundamentally about prioritization. And there's a lot of things that bodies and legislative bodies in particular are able to do in terms of digitalization and transparency. But I would say that the private sector mandate that we have is to basically identify the most important and the highest priority items that organizations and private sector needs to have the parliamentary clarity that they need to be able to operate their businesses. Right, these are people that are employing millions of people, that are investing into new markets, that are pioneering new technologies, and to the extent that they can get some level of clarity about what governments are ultimately doing. I mean, that's the fundamental goal, right? I mean, why does government exist? What is government trying to accomplish, right? Government exists to be able to create effectively these laws and regulations that are promulgated into society. And to the extent that people need to be able to have the clarity to be able to understand what the government is doing, why it's doing it, and what the intention is, the prioritization of those efforts, needs to be key, right? So, in my head, I think about the life cycle of a law, if you will, right? From the ideation of that law to the actual passage of that law, to the implementation of that law, to the consistent ongoing monitoring of that law. You have these sort of different work streams that exist in particular parliaments. And I would say that to the extent that you can sort of prioritize very high level items in each of those categories, right? So what are the ideas that are floating through specific parliaments? What's the docket of particular pieces of legislation that may be being passed through? What particular areas of oversight are legislative bodies kind of pushing themselves on? Prioritizing the highest items in each of those categories, and then having a very specific framework for understanding the actual information that needs to be disseminated for the purpose of actually implementing laws and regulations, and then ultimately having people comply with them. That's what I would say is obviously very important, right? So just having that particular almost like a framework of information or a map of information that needs to be kind of prioritized at the end of the day.
Thank you, Tim. We are reaching the final moments of our debate today. I'd like to give you very briefly a moment to share any final thoughts you might have. Ludovic, would you like to share?
Yeah, just a couple of words to conclude. That I would say that if you want to talk about digital transformation of a democratic body, this requires before everything democracy. And this is online with what Tim was mentioning just before. Parliaments need to support educational programs to explain what democratic values are, and all organizational entities can support the evolution of the societies. This is really fundamental right now. And then you need to go where the citizens are, because they will not come to you. You need to go where they are, and this is about communication. You need to provide the information, the data, in a way that they can be meaningful for the persons, for the citizens who will have an access to them, depending on the platform that they will use to access them. So if we have to work on a topic, for me, this is really to regain trust from the citizens, from the civil society, to design a new future. I hope a brilliant future, because everything remains to be written. Nothing is written yet.
Thank you, Ludovic. Mariane, would you like to share your final thoughts as well?
Very briefly, I just wanted to thank you for this opportunity. Very interesting debate. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mariane. Justin, would you like to share your final thoughts as well with us?
No, just echo that. Thank you for the opportunity. It's great to engage in this manner. And we've got some great challenges ahead, but we also have the ability to meet them if we all share experiences and work together.
Thank you, Justin. Jeffrey, would you like to share your final thoughts?
platforms like this are needed. We need to engage more. I think we need to share more. So I don't take this for granted, and I think that you know, the more we talk, you know, the better it is for where we are trying to, the place we are trying to reach, and that is really giving citizens parliaments that are open and that where they can actually fully participate in the business. So thank you very much, and I appreciated all the inputs from the speakers today. Thanks.
Thank you, Jeffrey. Tim, would you like to share final thoughts?
You know, certainly would love to continue to engage on the topics of transparency and digitalization. So appreciate the time here as well.